Jesus, we think Jesus comes just to, fuss at the people that need fussing at. And then we look at who he's fussing at and, oh my goodness, they go to church. We might be some of them right here in this place, gathered on Zoom and in person. We just might have, one or two Pharisees in the group. Way back when, you all remember it, it was called the Exodus, and God gave Moses some laws that he was to give to the people, and they didn't have anything to do with washing your hands, or what foods you should eat and what foods you shouldn't eat, or how you should make sacrifices, or any of those things. They had to do with how you were to live in God's presence. But being that we have free will and our minds have a bad tendency to just wander into the realm of, well, what if this? Would that be breaking the law? Well, it wouldn't if this. And we go back and forth until we have almost completely rewritten those 10 commandments, and now there's 614 of them. And God's going, wait, what? The Pharisees took to heart a tiny little passage in Exodus that says that Israel is to be a priestly nation, a holy place, an example to other nations. And they really liked, the Pharisees did, that phrase, priestly nation. So they decided that what was good for priests, right? What priests were supposed to do when they were offering sacrifices and doing their work, what priests did was good for everybody else. And priests, before they offer a sacrifice, wash their hands. Therefore, everybody who is faithful, who is truly religious and follows the Lord their God, should wash their hands before a meal, because that makes the meal sacred, a sacrifice, if you will. Although I'm not quite sure how feeding myself becomes a sacrifice for anybody else. But that was the way they thought. Now, lest we forget, it wasn't all Pharisees who were quite this rabid. It was just that group who were saying to Jesus, how come? And not all the disciples ate without washing their hands, and not all the people of Israel did what the Pharisees did. He's talking to this very particular group of people who want to keep everything exactly right. So much so that that's all they really think about. Because if you do exactly the right thing, of course then God will be with you and you will be worshiping God, except maybe not. Because we become so obsessed with making sure that our hands are clean, that our masks are on, that we're 6 feet apart, that we don't touch door handles and things that other people who have COVID might touch, that becomes the sole focus of our life, doesn't it, my friends? We have all been there in the last 18 months. We have all had those moments where we are so wrapped up in keeping safe that safe becomes an icon. Safe becomes the sole reason for living. And God says, wait, what? We do that all the time. We are a wonderful church. Not just St. Philip's, but the Episcopal Church. Was born into the Episcopal Church. I've been an Episcopalian all my life. Thought about being a Lutheran for a while and then gave that up. I couldn't remember why I was going to do it, and I really did like the Episcopal Church better anyway, but everybody doesn't have to be an Episcopalian. And every Episcopalian doesn't have to do things exactly the same way. Many of us genuflect at times during the service. Many others don't. It's entirely up to you. If somebody doesn't, you can't go, what are you doing? Why didn't you do that? That's just silly. But from the very moment that Jesus ascended into heaven, the church, or whatever what the church was at that point, began to make rules. Paul is constantly telling people to please send money to the widows and orphans in Jerusalem. And the people in Corinth and many other places are going, why? What? We We have widows and orphans in Corinth. Why do we have to send it to Jerusalem? Well, because that's the seat of the church, And so it's important that we keep them alive and take care of them, which is true, but not to the point where that becomes obsessive or that becomes the sole focus of why we follow Jesus. It was a dangerous time. Not only were the Romans not real happy about Christians, but the Jews didn't really like them either. And then there were pagans of other sorts, and they really wondered about Christians. And so Christians had to be very careful about gathering together. And so they began to make rules about who could come in and who couldn't. If you wanted to be baptized into the Christian faith, whatever it was at that point, it was a 3-year period of instruction, of fasting frequently, of lots and lots of lectures by long-winded clergy. It was really rigorous. You couldn't just sort of pop in and say, well, this looks good, I'll go here. They'd say, no, I don't think so. We're going to take you over to this room here. You can't sit with these people because they're baptized. We're going to take you over there and we're going to talk to you for 3 years. And we're going to make sure that you're a clean person. And then we're going to baptize you in this great big pool naked in front of all the elders of the church. And we're going to dunk you 3 times. Then you're going to come out the other side. And we're going to throw oil all over you from your head down to your toes. And we're going to wrap you in a nice white garment. And it's the day before Easter. And we're going to let you go through that door finally and join the community. I guess they figured that if people stood the test, they must really want to be Christians. Nowadays, of course, especially in the Episcopal Church, we don't do that. You know, we baptize people as infants, we baptize people as adults or as children. It's when they want to come into the church. But here's what we do. If you want to come to this rail right here, you have to be baptized. I've read the scriptures many times. Jesus never says that. Jesus says, go and baptize. But Jesus doesn't say, in order that people can take communion. This is a big fight in the Episcopal Church right now. I know you're all wondering why, but it is. Because people are so intense about getting the order just right. Making sure that people who come to this rail should come to this rail. And what does that say to the people who aren't baptized? You're out there, folks. We're going to do some things. We're going to throw some water on you. We're going to have some conversations. And then we're going to let you come to the rail. At my previous church, I had one person who wanted to be confirmed that year. It was a small church. And about, I don't know, she'd been coming since January, taking communion since January, somewhere in August or September. Confirmation was in November. One Sunday morning, she said something about baptism. She'd never been baptized. Well, I didn't really care. But there were people sitting at the table where she was who went, what? So I called my bishop. I just happened to know that the bishop agreed with me. And I said, so here's the deal, George. And he said, yeah, why are you calling me? I said, that's what I thought. Okay, we're fine. And she was confirmed in November, and we didn't keep her from taking communion until then. After a while, people sort of thought, well, what was the point of that anyway? But I had another couple who came to church for 6 months. They were in their 70s. They'd had their daughter baptized when she was little, and she was confirmed, and she was important in her church. And they came to me and said, we wondered if you noticed we don't ever take communion. And I said, well, yeah, I do, but I figured someday you'd tell me about that. And they said, well, here we are. They were raised in traditions, believers' baptism was the deal. And every Sunday they got preached about hellfire and damnation, about how bad they were and how awful they were. And they were both teachers of dance for Arthur Murray. That was a bad thing to be. And so they were terrified. And finally, in their 70s, they said, we should just be baptized. And I said, sure. I said, you do know you could have taken communion beforehand. And they said, yeah, we figured nobody would say anything, but it meant something to us. And I said, then it's a good thing you waited. They needed to wait. This other woman was eager to be right up here. receiving the body and blood of Christ every Sunday, she didn't need to wait for confirmation. But the rules say they were good, she was not. Now tell me, people, where is Jesus in those rules? We get so hung up on little tiny things. Are the acolytes wearing leather shoes or are they wearing sneakers? Did the altar guild do this just right? Or is the corporal or the veil on the chalice kind of cattywampus? How do we do those things? I had a priest fuss at the altar guild once because there were fingerprints on the chalice. Yep, I don't know how we were supposed to put it on the altar without touching it, but he seemed to think that we could manage that. Those little things tie us up in knots and take us away from what's important because they consume that place in our heart which is supposed to be for God. In the collect this morning, and I will confess I didn't see this until this morning, the collect says, increase in us true religion. True religion goes back to the basic commandments that God gave Israel in the Exodus, and Jesus summarized for us: love the Lord your God with all that you are, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. There's not a lot of picky little things in there. They tried. Remember, the guy says, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus went into this long story, which was about somebody who was really awful, and you didn't want him to touch you, and he did anyway. And he saved this person's life. Who was the neighbor? We have to look at people as children of God, people we don't like, people we love, people we wished we loved, but just somehow haven't managed to do that, people we don't know from Adam. And there are tons of them streaming into this country right now, from Afghanistan and from other places. And there are many of us who wish they weren't here. There are many people who don't know what we're going to do with all those folks. And so we're starting to build walls and make rules and nitpick about things. And Jesus just says, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus doesn't say, set up tests, make rules, create paperwork, and for God's sake, make sure they're safe. I was horrified when I heard that many of those first plane loads were going into Texas, a state that has very high COVID rates. And Afghans probably haven't been vaccinated. And yet they sent them to Texas because that's where they could send them. And the number of signs and things we have seen from those places where people are being deplaned that say, welcome to Texas, welcome to DC, welcome to our neighborhood. That's the right thing. That's true religion. No lines, no paperwork, no blood tests, no who was your mother, what did your father do for a living, where'd your family come from? Just welcome. As people flee New Orleans again from the storm, I was on airplanes with some of those people yesterday, fleeing New Orleans. I was just coming home. I was reminded, as many people in New Orleans are this weekend, of Katrina, and how many people left and never came back. And they could do that because wherever they landed after Katrina, somebody said, welcome. Somebody said, we're glad you're safe. They didn't say, we're glad you're here, but we don't have any jobs for you. We don't really have a place you can live. And you're not going to use my gasoline to get your car to work, are you? They said, welcome. True religion happens every single day. And we don't have to impose rules and restrictions on any of our brothers and sisters in this world. Think about what would have happened if nobody had ever started to nitpick the 10 Commandments, and there weren't 614 more. And Judaism was just based on 10 Commandments. things would be very different in our world. Maybe we wouldn't have war. Maybe we would make sure, as many of you have with bringing fruits and vegetables on Sundays, to make sure our neighbors are fed. Maybe we would have less need for food pantries, or maybe more need for food pantries, and we'd have them full. And we would make sure that the people who need to be fed are fed. And we wouldn't ask them why they're not fed. We wouldn't ask them why they can't get a job or why they haven't bothered to work for pennies on a dollar. We'd just say, welcome, what can we do for you? We're doing that at St. Philip. It's important that you pay attention to that, and it's important that you be a part of it, even if it's just putting $5 in an envelope occasionally. Not everybody has to come and fill bags and make sure the shelves are full. Physically, sure, the shelves are full. Some people just need to make an offering, to bring in some food, to add it to the pantry, and to say their prayers for those people who need our help. And when they show up, let's make sure we say, welcome.